Hello everybody, this is Mike. I'm here for another video. I'm not going to go through the usual intro. This is going to be a shorter than normal video. Daniel Pratt responded to my curvature of water video, the part 2 version. Well, here's what he had to say.
So this is going to be a response to a response, yet again, highlighting the confirmation bias, complete and total disconnect from reality that the globe scientism cult members suffer from. And I'm not saying that as an insult. It's just the reality of the situation.
Confirmation bias. Now that's funny. And it's going to become kind of important here in a minute or so. For now, here's the next clip I want you to see.
To be honest, I don't even know the dude's name, his channel name. The latest Johnny Come Lately gonna come think he's gonna destroy the flat earth.
Johnny Come Lately. Seriously? I've been debunking science deniers online for nearly 20 years, over 20 years. I started with moon hoaxers and then 9/11 so-called truthers. Started in the late 90s. And I've been doing debunking science denying globe deniers like Daniel Pratt since about 2015. So I've been doing it 7 years or so, which is how long he says he's been doing this in this video. So, and you couldn't even have the common courtesy to know who it is that you're actually responding to. And, if you didn't want to use my name so no one comes to my channel, that's just fine. I really don't care about that. But to even just say you don't know who you're responding to, well, listen up, everybody. It gets even worse. Watch this.
This particular video, I didn't even watch the video as usual. No need.
And there it is. Didn't even watch the video. And then he's talking about me exhibiting confirmation bias. He already decided that it wasn't worth watching, and then he scrolled through it. He tells you later on in his video he scrolled through it to see if there was me with a, ruler in my hand, whatever, going off and actually measuring curvature of the water. That's not what the video was about. And if he had actually had the balls to watch it, he would have known that. All right, so what was the video about? He talked about how it was just some people running an experiment in the 1980s or 1990s. Of course, he doesn't know. And the only reason he knows that it was the 1980s or 90s was because I told him that in a comment, in actually responding to his comment underneath my video. It was 1986. Okay, so what exactly was it we were talking about? What was my original video about? And I'll link both parts of the tow carriage videos in the description, and I'll even link you to Pratt's video so you can watch the full things, so you can get context for the things that I'm going to talk about and have talked about that he said in his video. Rather than just relying on me, you can go and watch his video and see what it's about. Okay, so when I presented this rail straightness metrology of the David W. Taylor model basin test report, it wasn't to show that they went off in 1986 and did an experiment for the curvature of water. That's not what that was. What this was measuring the existing rails over the tow basin. You could sort of see the tow rails in this picture, right here, and here's a little illustration of how it works. This is the tow carriage. This is, in this case, a ship's hull form attached to the tow carriage, and this is where all of the data cables and connections are to this hull form for testing. This carriage that you see in this long tunnel rides on these rails over the water. Now, when this tank was built in the 1930s 30s, I think this particular version was built. It was already built with the rails curving to match the curvature of the water, especially in the longer tank that's over a half a mile. So it isn't as if the test report I was presenting was some experiment on the curvature of the water. No, it was just verifying that the rails, which had been in use for decades, had seen heavy use for decades, that those rails were still within the original construction tolerance following the curvature of water. So here's the other thing, Danny. If you bothered to actually do any real research and understand the science that you're talking about, you would know that this hydrodynamic test facility and many, many others throughout the world all have rails that curve in order to make sure that they follow the curvature of the water. And the reason is this little hull form here. See how the water line runs across this hull form? These rails are curved to match the water so that that water line stays constantly where they want it for testing this form, whatever it happens to be. In this case, it's a ship's hull. Sometimes it's a missile, a torpedo, and there's even one test report where they modeled human legs. So this is vitally important to make this tank work. It does not work if these rails are not curved. So here is the test report I talked about in my previous video. Now, why this test report is important is because it measured the rails. The rails were designed to follow the curvature of the water. They had been in heavy use for decades, especially after it was built in the 30s, through the 30s, 40s, 50s, even onto the 60s. Every single ship the Navy designed, because the Bureau of Ships used to design all their own craft, every single one of them was tested in this test facility. So it saw a lot of use. And they also tested other things. They went off and did all this work. It saw a lot of use. So this report, this test was commissioned in order to be able to ensure that the rails met the design criteria and that they were still going to get useful data out of all of the model testing that they were going to do. So this abstract explains it all. They went off to go do field measurements of the horizontal and vertical straightness errors of the drive rails. So thus, the top surface of the rails is designed to be level rather than flat, and an ideal line is an arc of a circle with a radius equal to the radius of the Earth. And we talked about this at length in the past video too. The tops of the finished rails shall lie concentric with the still water surface in the adjacent basins, with a maximum variation of plus or minus 0.005 inches. 5/1000ths of an inch is the maximum variation you can have in any one location. It's a very tight, and follow the still surface of the water so that it is level rather than flat, with an arc of a circle with a radius equal to the radius of the Earth. That's important. So this was already designed and built with that curvature to be able to follow the curvature of the water in the basins. The rest of this report goes into great detail of how it is that they measured those rails, the equipment they used, the mitigation of errors that they took, including accounting for errors in the correction for the curvature of the Earth, because we know that the curvature of the Earth is not consistent throughout every location on the planet. So they had to make sure that they accounted for that. So this is a very detailed report. It covers exactly how it was done, what equipment was used, and this wasn't supposed to be as Pratt tried to put it, because he didn't even have the balls to watch the video. If he had, he wouldn't have said this. But what he says is that, This was supposed to be some gotcha about going off and measuring the curvature of water, performing experiments. And he even complained about the fact that they didn't record it, didn't video it, because that's what he wanted to see in the video. He wanted to see recordings of the actual measurements. Took like 4 months of tedious engineering work, where engineers taking measurements, setting up equipment, putting in lasers, doing calibrations and every day, going off and taking measurements. Who the hell would possibly have videotaped that in 1986 at any point in time? This wasn't done as proof of curvature. This wasn't done to prove to flat earthers that the earth curves, because that, for these people, wasn't even a question. It wasn't even a consideration that the earth doesn't curve. They went off and they took the measurements on the rails. They figured out what the errors were. They went off and did their report to make sure that they were still getting good data out of it. And the rest of the report goes on to actually detail the results of the measurements, the error in mils for each position of these rails. And you could see there's quite a bit of variation in here, more than they're supposed to have. They had to go off and do some work. So where does this leave us? It gets us back to what I wanted to talk about in the very beginning of this video. Confirmation bias. Because that's what Daniel Pratt is accusing me of, right, Dan? That's what you're accusing me of, is confirmation bias. You didn't even watch the video, so you don't know that that's not what this video was about. And so let me explain that detail to you. This video was not about experiments to prove water curves. No, this was about a test report for a facility that was already designed for the rails of the carriages to be curved to follow the water. And the original rails were measured off of that water during initial construction. So it wasn't an experiment to prove curvature. It was simply a measurement of something that was already part of engineering design and construction to account for that curvature. And where does the confirmation bias thing come in? Well, you're the one with the confirmation bias. You have such a cognitive bias towards the flat earth that this is what you literally did. Float glass proves the earth is flat. Why? Because the tin in the channel that you float the glass onto is flat. Well, why is that flat? Because you presupposed the earth is flat, therefore the tin must be flat. Therefore, as the glass floats on the tin, it is flat, therefore proving your presupposition that the earth is flat. Do you see how that works, Dan? You presupposed the earth is flat and said, float glass proves my presupposition of the earth is flat. You didn't provide a single measurement. You didn't detail what the tolerances were. You didn't detail how measurements were taken, if any, which of course they wouldn't. Who would take measurements of that? Nobody cares, because the distance the working on is so short, it really doesn't matter. It is as flat as it's going to possibly get. 3, you then took that, your presupposed flatness of the tin because of the flat earth, to say this proves my supposition. I gave detailed engineering analysis, design, and measurement, including all the equipment used, the tolerances, and everything. But in your mind, that is not as a high of a standard as presupposing the earth is flat to prove the earth is flat. Dude, you're the one with the cognitive bias here. let's see if you actually have the balls to watch this video and then respond to it to show us why your float glass is more of a evidence of curvature than all of these hydrodynamic test facilities throughout the world that exist, where these rails are curved to match the curvature of the water in the basins that they drag the models through. Do that. I am dying to see how you make float glass a higher standard than an engineering report with all of its details. Daniel Pratt, I'm Mike the engineer, and I'm out. Talk to you later, guys.